The setting is 2054. The ice caps have melted, and by consequence, cities have been consumed and the land's resources became much harder to acquire. Due to the scarcity of resources, nations have waged wars acquiring them. One of these wars was the long-awaited sequel, the one that sealed the trilogy, World War III. It turns out these wars have been enabled by a weapons manufacturing company called EVAC, literally cave spelled backwards. Nice. They've been fueling the flames of war by selling their inventory to all factions. In response, the UN conceived a plan to wipe out pilots. The goal is to perform a PSYOP
Panzerjäger translated stands for Tank Destroyer. That's pretty neat. UN good, sort of. EVAC bad. UN hire pilots to create violent PSYOP within EVAC. UN hopes this will dismantle EVAC internally. This plan cannot be traced back to UN, so the UN will kill the hired pilots if successful, but the UN will grant them one wish prior to their termination. All pilots voluntarily accepted this. Great, now that that's established, let's get back to Metal Gear Ketsui. In typical shmup fashion, you have two ships, and they both have different styles. The Tiger Schwert, or Tiger Sword, has a wide shot with slower movement, but a faster lock-on function. The lock-on function is Ketsui's version of the powerful focus shot by holding down the fire button. The Panzerjäger, or Tank Hunter, has a direct line of fire, faster ship movement, and slower lock-on speed. The bullet hell genre and harsh difficulty are essentially synonymous, but when it comes to Ketsui's first stage, the innocuous facade is subtly revealed as you continue forward. To be more blunt, despite this being the first stage, this feels more challenging than typical shmups. Thankfully, Cave's last sound director, Namiki, is back, and his score will push the player through difficult challenges. This beginning track may honestly contend with dai-ou-jou's first stage music. God damn, if that doesn't hype you up, you smell. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Stinky.
Continuing on, the stage background consists of daytime cityscapes that are detailed enough, but in my opinion, doesn't catch my eye due to the muted colors. I suppose you'd want the focus to be on the enemies and bullets, and fair enough, but we've seen colorful shmups before. It's probably going for a more militant art direction, and that's fine. To me though, it's a little drab. The stage boss Bullfrog, just like the stage in general, will knock you out if you're careless, but he does drop quickly. The music is still consistent in quality. It's more gentle than the first track, but it still has an upbeat edge. The second thing that's immediately noticeable is that Cave didn't wait until stage 3 to unload the bullet swarms. No foreplay. You're just going to face this here and now. In fact, due to the bullets demanding your attention, it's harder for me to really notate the background while playing it anyway. Looking back at the footage, yeah, my feelings about the backgrounds also stay consistent. You've got artillery warehouses, fields, cliffsides, yeah, typical stuff. And just like the backgrounds, the enemies, although detailed, are also kind of bland. Artistically, it feels like Ketsui plays it very safe. This game has an identity, but I don't believe it's for its art design. More on that later. Eventually you'll engage with Stage 2's boss, the XM117 Sphinx. This battle tank's bullet patterns, as you can imagine, have more depth than Bullfrog's, but with how quickly that fight was, this fight felt longer than usual. Obviously, as the difficulty ramps up, the bosses are going to have more health, but this, to me, felt more extended than it had to be. I suppose now is a better time than any to say my routine "I'm a shmup casual" statement, so for the shmup gigachads watching this, if your blood pressure increases, you've been warned. Stage 3. The track? A certified hood classic. And you'll need to let that hype guide your performance because in usual Stage 3 fashion, this is what separates the demigods from the men. Normally I would have stated men from the boys, but that already happened in Stage 2. This stage is what confirmed my stance on the enemies. They are a bit samey. But hey, this stage has color now, so that's a plus. Fun fact, there's a secret extend, 1-up, if you destroy every part of the Vinogradov's warship without using a bomb. Neat! Good luck! After thanking God for emulation, exploiting bombs, and infinite credits, you'll reach the attack craft Jamadar. Despite the patterns being more involved, he drops faster than the Sphinx tank in Stage 2, which may validate my thought that that fight seemed to drag out. Or, this is just a great example of anecdotal confirmation bias. Stage 4. The track? It's fine. I know Namiki has a portfolio of W's, so to speak, but this song isn't one of them. Is it bad? Not necessarily. This sounds like a B-side track for Dodonpachi, but then was axed and archived for a rainy day. I just don't believe it fits in Ketsui. It has this heavy industrial sound, but 90% of the stage takes place in bland canyons. It's not until the boss fight with Cinderella Amber that you see some kind of militant backdrop. I suppose you could argue it's a tough track for a tough stage, but that could be applied for most of these stages. Compared to the sound and themes of the other tracks, this one sticks out like a sore thumb, which is a bummer. Having a solid track on the stage would have energized me because at this point the harsh difficulty fatigued me. I was relying on bombs and dying often. Son of a bitch. At least the stage boss was unique. It requires you to circle around it and utilize your lock-on function. This stage's score returns to form and even has callbacks to the first stage's theme. Now it was at this point where something hit me. The sound direction of Ketsui borrows a lot of patterns from dai-ou-jou. Noisy Town and Toa stimulates. Armored Green and Saikyo assimilates. Twilight Fleet and Saibu rejuvenates. Lurking in Darkness and Sakuretsu oppresses. And Day of Judgment and Taito harkens back to the first track. It's all there, and if you listen to each of these songs, you'll hear exactly what I mean. As a consequence, I really can't help to compare the music between the two games. And to be completely honest, dai-ou-jou musically takes the cake as a complete package. As much as I appreciate final stages throwing in callbacks to the original stage's melodies, it's not as effective here. And that's not just because I like DOJ's final track better, but thematically DOJ has a reason to call back. It's not just a callback to the first stage's theme, but a callback to the Dodonpachi series in general. DOJ's final stage had returning bosses from Dodonpachi and familiar set pieces. Ketsui's final track doesn't carry that level of weight. But moving on from that, in terms of the stage as a whole, yep, it's the final stage alright. The enemies are upgraded versions of previous artillery and aircrafts you faced. This thematically makes sense as you literally infiltrated a corrupt corporation weapons development facility. So as you can imagine, bullets are flying and I am dying. Once you reach to the core of the base, you'll confront the Evacueer. Complex bullet patterns will force you to be aware of every direction you commit to. There's very little room for error, but in typical cave fashion, this is not the true ending. You'll get a cutscene at the very least, but it turns out the Evacueer you faced was a prototype. That ends my first run of Ketsui. So here's my personal rundown of this experience. As I was setting this up, I wanted to adjust the dip switch settings so that way I can have a button for auto-fire. Upon doing this, I noticed that the difficulty was set to easy. I told myself, well, that's not right, and I adjusted it back to normal. Guys, this was a mistake. It pains me to say, but I really didn't enjoy my time because of doing this. I've seen a reoccurring sentiment from seasoned shmup players that the difficulty of the genre is what steers players away. But I'm here, and I'm a chump. I know there are others like me that enjoy running through these titles despite the difficulty, just to see how far they can survive without taking a life or credit. That being said, I do believe if Ketsui is what popped your shmup cherry, I'd be hesitant to come back too. Ketsui wasn't built for casuals. This game is just fucking ruthless. The scoring system is ruthless, the secret loops are ruthless, it's just ruthless. If you were wondering what those numerical green blocks were, I assure you, I am not playing the Japanese rendition of Math Blaster. These chip values depend on your proximity when attacking the enemy. The closer you are, the higher the value. This is obviously a risk versus reward function, but it doesn't stop there. When you destroy an enemy above a 1-point chip, a countdown starts, rapidly decreasing. This is your window to rack up some points. For example, let's say you destroy an enemy point blank with your normal fire, resulting in a 5-point chip. Then you switch directly to the lock-on attack during this countdown period. All chips, regardless of your proximity, will be 5. Oh, that's nice. Still not done though. Once that counter reaches 0 and you're still using the lock-on function, the chip value will revert back to 1. And to further circumvent lock-on abuse, some of your chips accumulated will be lost per enemy defeated. Still not fucking done. Once you confront the stage boss, your chips start depleting, forcing you to defeat it as aggressively and quickly as possible. And mind you, this is on top of already being a harder than usual shmup title. Whatever remaining chips you have will be multiplied for that stage total.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Now some of you may say, well, I don't really care about score, I just want to survive more than 12 seconds. And you know what? I'm right there with you, pal. But if you want to face Doom Avakineer, the true final boss, you'll be ripping your hair out in no time, because there's not one, but 2 loop paths you can take depending on your completed run results. Oh, what's that? You completed the run without using a single continue? And you expected to face the true boss? Too bad, pussy. You were hit at least 2 times and used a bomb when you were cornered. As punishment, the scrolling direction is inverted. Enemies now spray suicide bullets if you don't destroy them close enough, and you still won't face Doom Avakineer during this loop. What? That's right. This is known as the Omote loop. This isn't the loop you want. The loop you want is the Yura loop. This requires 120 million points with 0 deaths and 0 bombs used. During this loop, enemies now have double the bullets, suicide bullets, and when you've successfully isolated yourself from your friends and family long enough to face Doom Avakineer, you only have 3 minutes to destroy it or else you lose. No continues. 3 minutes, you question? But I don't see a timer. It's hidden. Look, I've seen an article that states that Ketsui is less punishing than dai-ou-jou because when you die, your score multiplier decreases but isn't reset. I understand in the context of scoring, sure, but if you want to face the true boss, how is it any different than dai-ou-jou? I'll tell you how. dai-ou-jou is at least straightforward. Meet the requirements, the end. Are they harsh requirements? Yes. Do you have to focus more on enemy patterns and rely on memorization? Yes. But at least it doesn't blue ball you into a pseudo loop if you're good, but not quite good enough. I know I may not be in a position to be all that critical considering I haven't one-credited Ketsui, but I also don't need to scale Mount Everest to point out the extreme difficulty in that either. But before the Ketsui stands choke me through their monitor, maybe I approached Ketsui the wrong way. Maybe I was running on E when I played through it. Ketsui is a program. No feelings, no thoughts, just kill. Obviously tips, pointers, and reference videos are plastered all over the internet, but my point stands. It's just you and the game. You have to take the time to understand what Ketsui wants out of you. So I took the L and started my second playthrough on easy. I feel awful admitting this, I enjoyed myself more than I did my first attempt. And that's mainly because I felt like I actually had a damn chance. Bullet patterns just seem more reasonable. So after completing Ketsui on easy as a warm-up, I wanted to jump back into normal to see if I learned anything. I know what I'm about to say isn't a big victory, but I'm still going to take it. I completed the first stage without dying, and when I landed that final blow on Bullfrog, I enthusiastically slammed my fist on the desk. That's exactly what I'm fucking talking about. You put in the work, you'll get the results. This is the runner's high that challenge-oriented players love. Of course, I still took some hits in this playthrough, but the fact stands that I died less. I know this because I was placed higher on the leaderboards than my first run. I believe where I went wrong on my first run was strafing too far often. During this run, I did my best to move when I really needed to. Regardless, it may not shock anyone to hear this, but Ketsui is one of those games that you get what you put into it. That's a given considering it's a shmup, but Ketsui demands more than its contemporaries. Ketsui wasn't developed with the idea of ports in mind. This was confirmed later because Arika, the developers responsible for dai-ou-jou and Espgaluda's PS2 ports, was actually working on bringing Ketsui to the PlayStation 2 as well. However, halfway through the final stage, the game would glitch hard, causing background distortions and your ship flying backwards. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough RAM to make proper corrections, so instead of compromising with the hardware limitations, Arika just said, "Nope," and washed their hands clean from it. It wouldn't be until 7 years later, players got to experience Ketsui from the comfort of their homes. On April 22nd, 2010, the Xbox 360 port of Ketsui was released, and was developed by our pals at 5PB again. At first, I was surprised that Cave continued to work with them after that disaster of a launch with dai-ou-jou. But after thinking about it more, it really isn't all that surprising. I recall Cave struggling to find a publisher prior to dai-ou-jou, so my guess is they took what they had. But thankfully, this release wasn't a disaster. Lessons have been applied, and this ports of Ketsui is relatively respectable. A bit lacking in content, but it does the job. It includes a brand new mode aptly titled X Mode. The arranged BGM isn't ass this time either.
Something else I noticed while playing this is there seems to be more chips to collect. It turns out that you do not only acquire chips when enemies are destroyed, but whatever remaining bullets that are fired by said enemy convert into chips. That explains why this mode feels easier, because it is. If you shoot down the enemy fast enough, you will minimize bullet obstacles. This is a similar mechanic to Pro Gear. Also, the ship shortly after the mid-boss that creeps out on the side of the screen on stage 4 didn't kill me. It only took me 4 playthroughs for my neurons to properly activate on that one. I eventually ran out of credits on this same stage, and just like 5PB's version of dai-ou-jou, you are not granted unlimited credits. In hindsight, I actually enjoyed X mode a lot. I could see myself trying to complete this run even with limited credits. Some of you may point out that's most likely due to the reduced difficulty, and to that I say, shut up. November 29, 2018, Ketsui Destiny released on the PlayStation 4. And no, I did not attempt to say Destiny, but happened to have a lisp. It is literally called Destiny, and just like its name, the cover art is stupid too. By the way this looks and sounds, it looks like Fisher-Price made a helicopter game. Despite the questionable naming and graphic design choices, how is this package as a whole? Pretty damn great actually, which is expected when our returning Pales M2 Shot Triggers is back at the helm. Content includes the tried and true arcade mode, a super easy mode with scaled back bullet patterns, auto bombing in case you get hit, and the ability to face the true boss. I'm saying Destiny too much, it fucked up my vocabulary. And the ability to face the true boss without score requirements. Custom mode lets you guessed it, customize your Ketsui experience. You can resize your hitbox, enable suicide bullets after enemies are destroyed to increase difficulty if you're a masochist, start the game on loop 2, give yourself the ability to acquire extends more frequently, and other miscellaneous features. Arcade Challenge Mode splits each stage into sections. This allows you to overcome a part of the stage that's been giving you trouble. This is great for players practicing 1-credit runs, or just improving overall. Bonds of Growth Mode is also a teaching tool. When you die, your run will reverse where you were 5 seconds beforehand. The goal is to last more than 10 seconds so that you can recognize and correct your mistakes. The devs incentivize this by rewarding you with bond points that go towards an online leaderboard. What's awesome about these features is how beginner-friendly it really is. I'm sure there are plenty of players that see the frantic and fun gameplay Cave has to offer, but are discouraged by its brutal nature when they try it out. These modes were made to circumvent this. I know people can look up forums and YouTube tutorials, but some players are not willing to go that far. However, when these tools are baked into the game itself, I imagine their retention is much higher. Continuing on, Destiny is a mode specifically created by M2. Instead of bombs, you have a glorified hypermeter known as Death Troy. Oh my god. You can activate it manually or when you get hit like the Autobomb feature. You know, for a game emphasizing death, combining words with death and the result of making you sound the same way a deaf person speaks, you actually experience death less in this mode. For instance, I was able to complete this run on my first attempt. Thankfully, like Super Easy mode, it doesn't have scoring requirements to face the true end boss. And finally, the last mode I want to talk about is IKD 2007 Special. Wait a minute. IKD stands for Ikeda. Now here's the scoop. There was a custom variant board of Ketsui that was playable at the 2007 Cave Matsuri event. It's incredibly rare and was hand-tweaked by Ikeda, Cave's director, himself. I believe it's fantastic that this is now accessible for consumers, but sadly, this mode and a specialized arrange track are locked behind paywalls. The dreaded 3-letter acronym, DLC. Look, I'm not a genius for pointing out questionable DLC practices. This is a dead horse that's been well beaten. But I want to illustrate my thought process. Both IKD mode and the arranged OST are $7.99 each. That's $51 for the complete package. Mind you, this game never goes on sale. Now, one could argue that this cost as a whole is dramatically cheaper than physically owning multiple Ketsui variant PCBs, especially the ultra-rare Matsuri board. And my counter to that is, I don't care. I believe this should have been a complete package. We can rightfully praise M2 for their accurate and thoughtful ports of classic titles, but that doesn't mean the modern game sale landscape hasn't touched them. Despite that misstep, this package is the best port of Ketsui, hands down. If you actually want to get better at this game without downloading and configuring emulators, this is the way to go.
Ketsui Death Label is a strange title. This is really more of a boss rush mode than it is a port. You know how the Arika port of dai-ou-jou had an extra mode known as Death Label? Imagine if they ripped that single mode and decided to make an entire handheld game surrounding that single premise. That's what Ketsui Death Label is. Don't get me wrong, it has other features, like this one where a PNG cutout of Ikeda here is giving you tips on how to play the game. But I really didn't put a lot of time into this. I treated it as a curiosity rather than a requirement for this video. This was only released in Japan, but if you noticed, Ikeda was speaking to me in English. That's thanks to the mod community out there translating weird little titles like this for dorks like me to try out. If you have a flash cart, DSi, or 3DS with the Twilight menu, you can give this a shot. Because of tackling these titles, I have a handful of dedicated websites as proper resources. Shout out to Shmupulations for their translated cave interviews. However, when it comes to Ketsui, there wasn't much said about its development, or rather, that's already been said. If you recall in the last episode, I stated that Dodonpachi dai-ou-jou was developed on weaker hardware compared to Cave's original custom-made boards. Well, that story hasn't changed. The difference at this point is that the devs were more accustomed to the jank that comes with developing games on the PGM board. At least that's my guess, as Ikeda stated, developing Ketsui, dai-ou-jou, and Espgaluda on this hardware was a nightmare. Game design-wise, Takashi Ichimura, Ketsui's original programmer, was starting to feel tired of Cave's bullet pattern philosophies, and craved something a little bit different. Ikeda reflects on this during a 2018 developer interview. Linear motion for the bullet patterns was an iron law for us when making Dodonpachi, but on dai-ou-jou, our programmer Ichimura had started to complain. He laughs and continues, "For Ketsui, we brought his taste to the fore and created a game where the bullet patterns and enemies had no such boundaries." In terms of art direction, Ikeda wanted to revert back to their more militant roots. Ichimura recalls Ikeda stating, "I want to make a hardcore, tough guy shooting game." After coming away from dai-ou-jou, I could see wanting to have your palate cleansed, so to speak. Interestingly enough, from this point forward, Ketsui is Cave's last time they use this kind of setting, and my guess as to why was based on the public's reception when it was released in arcades. Players didn't seem to resonate with it. I don't believe players thought it was awful, but they seemed to feel like it was run-of-the-mill. Hiroyuki Tanaka, Cave's lead map and enemy designer, had this to say, "Ketsui is a game I'm extremely fond of, but I regret that it wasn't very well received at the time. It was a major blow to my confidence, and I felt like the world wasn't interested in my ideas." Thankfully, Tanaka doesn't have to feel too bad because time has been much kinder to Ketsui. As I mentioned earlier, Ketsui received a port 7 years after its arcade release, and sure, even at that time, reviewers like Famitsu gave it a 24 out of 40, mainly due to sparse features. But I believe it was due to ports, community forums, and time that really illuminated players on the subtle depth and richness to Ketsui's mechanics. Ironically, Ketsui, what was once perceived mediocre by players, is now argued to be one of the best shmups Cave has to offer. Thanks to emulation and M2's ports with excellent teaching tools, Ketsui is more accessible than ever, giving players that chance to really dig into its core mechanics. Overall, my experience with Ketsui wasn't what I expected. I felt my opinions of it shift consistently as I played through multiple variants of this game. Shmup gurus debate to this day whether dai-ou-jou or Ketsui should be set on the first place pillar. I could give you the generic YouTube response and state that it's subjective and that there isn't a right or wrong answer. This is technically true, but I'll be more forward with you guys. I like dai-ou-jou more. Near the beginning of this video, I stated that Ketsui's identity doesn't lie in its artistic setting, but lies in something else. That something else is its mechanics. In comparison, dai-ou-jou is a very colorful game as opposed to Ketsui's muted colors. I understand its art design was intentionally made to be more grounded, but that doesn't mean a setting can't pop. Esprit is a great example of this. While I was formulating these opinions, I was worried that expressing my take will anger some of you. Which I'm sure it will. That's certainly not the goal. But maybe not as much as I originally thought. Because if you recall, I'm not the only one that initially felt that Ketsui was a run-of-the-mill shooter. This is how a lot of players felt when this was released in arcades. Funny story, upon doing research, I ran into an old post from 2007 on a shmup forum. This user says, 2 things. 1, I'm drunk. That explains the spelling errors. 2, is it just me, or is Ketsui very overrated? I mean, I really liked it, my review here, but it seems to me that people seem to be upping this to Cave's holy grail of shooters, when in fact, personally, I think creatively in design, music, and system, it is actually quite basic, and dare I say it, average. This guy did receive criticism for his review, and sadly, that link is broken for being 100 years old. But if I'm going by the post at face value,
Honestly, I don't believe this guy is completely off base, specifically about Ketsui's overall design. It wasn't until years of ports and time did people see the underlying depth of Ketsui. Compared to dai-ou-jou, it didn't take years for players to truly love it. Players loved it immediately, and I believe it's due to strong presentation. I understand visuals are not everything, and again, Ketsui's visuals are not bad, but it's divisive. Strong art design is what captures attention. Depth is what keeps their attention. This is why I believe it took time for Ketsui to shine. It lacks strong presentation design. This take of mine may be supported due to the fact that Cave never emulated this design choice going forward. Something to note, however, this grounded aesthetic might be refreshing to Ketsui fans for that exact reason. Past Ketsui, Cave goes for a more anime style, usually different degrees of anime, but anime nonetheless. To wrap this up, I do believe Ketsui is a great game, but you won't know that until you give the game the attention it demands, and it will demand it.
There's a reason it's named Ketsui. It literally translates to determination. You know, halfway through creating this video, I thought if a friend asked me what shmup to start out with, Ketsui would not be it. But M2's port is so rich with meaningful and helpful content that pointing to this port specifically isn't throwing beginners into the lion's den. I believe M2 deserves an immense amount of credit for taking one of Cave's harshest titles and making it approachable.
Regardless, in the arcades, Ketsui didn't garner the attention Cave had hoped. Maybe what Cave needed was a different aesthetic as a way to pry players' curiosity.
Thanks for watching, guys. Shout out to Mexi50Cal for the contributor tier on my Patreon. Feel free to click on that down below, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.